Right now, the real silver money has vanished. Not silver-colored, not the shiny nickel token in your cup holder. I mean the real thing, coins that actually contain silver, the kind that used to sit in everyday change. And here's the weird part. They didn't disappear because they're rare. They disappeared because they're valuable. You're with us. Let's break it down. So let's start with the simplest question that exposes the entire mechanism. When was the last time you found a pre-1965 silver dime or quarter in normal change? Not in a collector set, not from a grandparent's drawer. I mean in the wild, at a grocery store, from a vending machine, in a tip jar. Most people can't name a single time. And that's not because those coins are mythical. Billions of them were minted. They circulated for generations. Then, in what amounts to a blink, they slipped out of public hands, like water through a crack. That is what actually happened. The good money left, and the cheap money stayed. Now look at the bigger implication. If a nation can lose real money out of daily life without a dramatic recall, what else can disappear the same way? Savings, purchasing power, actual metal behind claims, trust. And if we understand why that silver vanished, we understand what's happening again right now. Only this time, it's not just coinage. It's the entire paper versus real value system. We're going to walk through the rule that makes real value leave the table the moment the rules get rigged. Not conspiracy theory, not vibes. A repeatable human pattern. Economists gave it a name later, but civilizations lived it first. Bad money drives out good. That's the rule. That's the weapon. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because the same force that cleaned silver out of your pocket is now draining metal out of vaults, stretching supply chains, and turning paper prices into a comedy sketch. Now watch this. Imagine you're holding 2 quarters. Both say 25 cents. Both are legal tender, but 1 quarter contains real silver and the metal inside it is worth far more than the number stamped on the face. The other quarter is a copper-nickel sandwich worth pennies as raw material. You can only spend 1 at the vending machine. Which one do you spend? Exactly. You spend the junk. You keep the treasure. That isn't greed. That's survival software. It's the same instinct that makes us lock our doors. It's the same instinct that makes us ensure what matters. And when millions of people make that same obvious decision, the result looks like magic from the outside. The good coins vanish. The bad coins flood everything. That phenomenon is what we're dealing with. The official term is Gresham's law, and it works like gravity as long as one condition exists. The government forces 2 kinds of money to trade as if they're equal. That force is legal tender. It means the cashier has to take the cheap coin at face value, even if everyone can feel it's not the same as the older one. So the market can't price the difference openly. The difference goes underground. People don't protest. They don't announce a boycott. They just quietly protect value. They stash it. They ship it. They melt it. They spend the bad money because it's the one they can afford to lose. Now here's a detail most people skip. Gresham's law isn't about silver. It's about forced equality between unequal things. The moment a system says, treat these 2 as identical, when one is clearly better, the better one starts leaking out. And once it starts leaking out, it doesn't come back easily. So let's prove this with history that hits like a hammer. First stop, Tudor England. A king needed cash for war and vanity. The treasury was bleeding. Taxes were already painful. So he reached for the lever that doesn't require permission. He diluted the money, not with ink, with metal. Coins that were supposed to be mostly silver became mixed, then more mixed, then mostly cheap copper. Officially, nothing changed. A shilling was still a shilling. But in real life, the coin became a costume, because the thin silver surface rubbed off with use, and the copper underneath started showing through on the highest point of the portrait. The king's nose, so the public gave him a nickname that still lands centuries later. Old Copper Nose. That wasn't just an insult. It was a warning label. It meant the public could see the debasement with their own eyes. And once people see it, trust dies fast. Foreign merchants stopped accepting English coins at the official rate. They demanded more coins for the same goods. Prices jumped. The good older coins, real silver, started leaving circulation immediately. People hoarded them because spending them was like handing away a wedding ring for arcade tokens. Bad money did the shopping. Good money went into hiding. Now here's the twist. England eventually fixed the problem by pulling trash coins back and reminting honest money. But that solution only works if you still have enough real metal to do it. So what happens when you've already burned the bridge? Hold that thought. Because it leads us to the biggest case study on the planet. Rome. Rome didn't conquer with swords alone. It conquered with trust. Its silver coin, the denarius, was so respected that it became a passport across trade routes. Merchants accepted it far from Rome's borders because it meant something. It rang true. It weighed right. But building an empire is expensive. Armies need pay, borders need defenses, politics needs bribery, and once the easy money is gone, rulers reach for the same lever again. They shave the coin. They lighten the weight. They mix the silver with base metals. At first it looks harmless, just a small reduction. A temporary measure. And that word temporary is the most dangerous word in money, because temporary becomes habit. Habit becomes policy. Policy becomes collapse. Crises stack, civil wars, invasions, a new emperor every other month. Each one needs instant loyalty from soldiers, so each one mints more coins. And to mint more, they stretch the silver thinner. Eventually, the denarius became a bronze disc with a thin silver wash, a costume that wore off almost instantly. People weren't stupid, they felt the change. So what did they do? They buried the old high silver coins in jars. They hid them in walls. They moved real money into private darkness. And the official money left in daily life became junk. That junk didn't just cause inflation, it broke the engine of trade. Soldiers demanded payment in goods. Farmers refused the coins. Barter crept back in. Rome didn't fall in a single day, but monetary corruption poured sand into every gear. Now, here's where we stop pretending this is ancient trivia, because the same pattern hit America inside one lifetime. Up until 1964, a dime or quarter in the United States wasn't just a token, it was 90% silver. For generations, the coin's face value and its metal value were tied together by design. But by the early 1960s, the math got dangerous. Industrial demand for silver was rising, government reserves were shrinking, the price of silver was creeping toward a point where the metal inside the coins could be worth more than the spend value. That is the exact moment Gresham's law wakes up. Because once metal value beats face value, every rational person stops spending the good coin. A coin shortage appears, not because there aren't coins, but because the good ones stop showing up at cash registers. So the government made a choice. In 1965, they removed silver from dimes and quarters and replaced it with copper-nickel layers. Half dollars were partially diluted too. They didn't call it debasement. They called it updating the system. And they told the public not to worry. They said the old silver coins would keep circulating. They said there was no real profit in holding them back. They said, essentially, trust us. Now answer this honestly. If those statements were true, why did the coins vanish? Because the public's hands knew more than the press conference. The new coins felt different. They sounded different when dropped. They didn't ring like silver. They clacked like tokens. And without any organized movement, without any grand plan, millions of people made the same choice. Spend the new stuff, save the old stuff. You could call it hoarding if you want. But it wasn't hysteria. It was arithmetic. Within a few years, finding a silver coin and change went from common to rare to basically impossible. That's the vanishing phenomenon. And it wasn't magic. It was logic at scale. Now we pull the camera back to 2026 because this is where it gets spicy. Today, most people still think silver price means a number on a screen. They see a quote and assume that's the real price. But the modern market has two different realities running at the same time. There's the paper market, and there's the physical market. Paper silver is a promise, a contract, a claim. Physical silver is the atom. One can be created with a keyboard. The other can only be pulled out of rock, refined, and delivered. And when those two realities diverge, that divergence is the digital version of the coin problem. Bad money versus good money. Here's the mechanism, and we'll keep it clean. A futures contract is an agreement about price. Most of the time, it never turns into a truck delivering metal. It turns into cash settlement. So paper-silver exposure can grow far faster than mine supply. It becomes a casino chip that says, I own silver without needing the actual bar on the table. That creates a situation where the same ounce of real metal can have multiple paper owners, like 10 people holding claim tickets for the same coat at the same time. As long as nobody tries to wear the coat, the tickets feel fine. But what happens when people walk up to the counter and say, no, seriously, give me the coat? The system tightens, inventory drops, premiums rise, delivery times stretch. And suddenly we discover the screen price is a paper story, not a metal story. That's why we can watch a quote and then walk into a dealer and get punched in the face with a much higher number. Because the dealer isn't selling a promise. The dealer is selling scarcity. Now we need to be disciplined. Fact, paper claims can multiply faster than physical inventory. Fact, physical metal must be delivered, fabricated, stocked, and financed. Interpretation, when delivery demand rises, paper pricing power weakens. And our one-line disclaimer stays true. This is educational. We manage risk. So what should we watch? Not hype, not memes. Pressure points. Watch the metal that is actually available for delivery in major vault systems. Watch the spread between spot and what real silver costs in the street market. Watch the demand engines that consume silver and don't politely return it. Solar manufacturing, electronics, medical equipment, high-end electrical contacts. Silver isn't just a shiny asset. It's an industrial ingredient that gets baked into products. And when it's used in tiny amounts across billions of devices, recycling becomes slow, messy, and often not worth the effort. So the supply that leaves the system can stay gone for a long time. Now here's a retention question that forces us to think. If paper supply can expand instantly, but physical supply can't, what happens when enough people decide the promise isn't enough? Because shortages don't announce themselves with a headline. They announce themselves with out of stock. They announce themselves with limit 2 per customer. They announce themselves with premiums that refuse to die even when the chart dips. That's the tell. And here's the contradiction that should make us sit up straight. We live in an era where money is unlimited. A central bank can create 1 billion new units with a few keystrokes, and nobody hears a mint press, nobody sees a truck of metal, nobody feels the weight. The number just appears. That's convenient in a crisis. It's also dangerous over time, because when the supply of the measuring stick grows faster than the thing being measured, the measurement gets weird. It's like using a rubber ruler. At first, you don't notice. Then one day you realize the ruler didn't change the table. The ruler changed itself. That's why everything gets more expensive in the same direction. Food, rent, healthcare, education. It's not that every business became evil overnight. It's that the unit we price things in gets diluted, and the dilution hides inside the calendar. Now connect that to silver. Silver is finite. It has to be mined. It has to be refined. It has to be moved, stored, and insured. So when we see paper claims balloon while physical inventory tightens, we're watching the same old movie in a new costume. And the market gives us a scoreboard, premiums. A small premium is normal friction. A massive premium is a vote of no confidence. It's the public saying, I don't care what the screen says, I want the thing. That is exactly what happened with the silver coins in the 1960s. The official story said, nothing to see here. The public response said, cool, we'll take the real ones and leave you the tokens. People stood at kitchen tables sorting change. Coin rolls got hunted like lottery tickets. Cashiers quietly checked for the brighter ring, the sharper sound, the heavier feel. Not because everyone studied economics, because everyone understands value when they touch it. And here's the open loop we need to keep in mind. When the next wave of people tries to touch it at the same time, what happens to availability? Not the quote, availability. Because that's where stress shows first. So if we ever see a moment where paper price dips but physical disappears, that's not a contradiction. That's the system flashing its warning light. And if we're wrong, we'll know where it shows first. It won't show up in a polite headline. It shows up when the rules start changing. When settlement gets encouraged. When delivery turns into equivalent cash. When the fine print becomes the front page. That's not drama, that's mechanics. So we don't need to predict doom. We just need to watch for the first crack between a promise and a product. Because once that crack is visible to everyone, the vanishing speeds up. Now we hit the sequel law. Gresham's law describes the phase where bad money drives good money into hiding. But what happens when bad money gets so bad that people refuse it outright? That's Tyr's law, and it flips the script. When confidence breaks hard enough, good money drives out bad because people demand something real for goods and labor. We've seen it in hyperinflation episodes where official bills become wallpaper. We've seen it when people start pricing items in foreign currency, food, fuel, or anything with stability. Now, we're not saying that's guaranteed tomorrow, but we are saying the early stage of value migration is visible when people pay up for physical and treat paper as optional. That's the bridge between the laws. And this is where we choose our posture. We don't panic. We don't worship charts. We don't gamble. We measure. We separate facts from narratives. We don't need to predict the exact day anything breaks. We need to recognize incentives and patterns. Because the core lesson from Rome, from Tudor England, from 1965, America is brutally consistent. Institutions prefer the painless option in the short term. Dilution, debasement, expansion. And the public always responds the same way. Protect what holds value, spend what doesn't. So here's the real question we should be asking, and it's uncomfortable. Are we already watching the early phase of that shift? Because if we are, then the vanishing phenomenon isn't about old coins, it's about the future. It's about what happens when the average person finally notices the difference between a claim and a thing. It's about what happens when industry competes with savers for the same finite element. It's about what happens when the public wakes up and realizes the good money doesn't come back once it leaves. So let's end where we began, with the simplest test we can run in our own life. Look at your change. Look at your savings. Look at what is real versus what is promised. Then ask yourself, if value is migrating, are we holding the thing or the receipt? And here's a challenge for our community. Drop a comment with your answer to this. Have you ever found a pre-1965 silver coin in everyday change? And if you did, where did it show up? And second, do you trust paper claims on metal, or do you only trust what can be delivered? If you want more breakdowns like this, fast, direct, no fluff, hit subscribe. We're building a smarter group, not a louder one, because the next time good money starts vanishing, we won't be confused. We'll be early. Stay sharp, because the quiet phase never lasts, and the loud phase never gives discounts to anyone. And if you think this story ends with coins, you haven't seen what happens when receipts outnumber reality.